Standing in the quiet stone courtyard of a small boutique hotel in Tuscany, I listened as an icy, polished voice over the phone shattered. 13 days of grueling work in under 2 minutes. Mrs. Samantha Vance, the wife of our corporation's chief executive, informed me that I had clearly forgotten who held the real authority at Vance Enterprises. When I calmly replied that my loyalty belonged to protecting the company's multi-million-dollar international deal, she replied that I worked for people who could replace me in a heartbeat. Before I could even process the quiet spite behind her words, a formal notification from Human Resources hit my inbox, confirming my immediate removal from the deal pending internal review. They were replacing me at the final signing table with David Hayes, a smooth-talking executive who had never once met our Italian partners or stepped inside their office. Headquarters genuinely believed they were teaching an overly assertive female employee a lesson in corporate hierarchy, entirely failing to realize that my presence was the only buffer holding a fragile, multi-million-dollar merger together. To understand how a CEO's wife possessed the unearned power to sabotage our largest international contract, you have to look at the toxic dynamic that governed Vance Enterprises for years. I had spent nearly a decade climbing the corporate ladder, earning a reputation as the negotiator who fixed impossible situations through quiet, precision, and total honesty. On the other hand, Samantha Vance treated the firm as her personal social playground, routinely meddling in high-stakes operations just to parade her elevated status. When our negotiations with the prestigious Sterling family in Italy began falling apart due to corporate arrogance from New York, executive leadership dispatched me to repair the damage. The Sterlings were a proud, traditional European family business who despised corporate theater, condescending executive suits, and broken promises. Over 2 intense weeks in Tuscany, I rebuilt that shattered trust line by line, earning their respect by being the only representative who offered direct truth, instead of polished executive lies. However, as the final signing date approached, Samantha decided she wanted her name attached to the triumphant press release and demanded last-minute edits to the legal language. She insisted on inserting aggressive, centralized oversight clauses into the final contract that directly contradicted the delicate compromises I had spent weeks establishing. When I firmly pushed back against her harmful edits to protect the deal from collapsing, Samantha viewed my professional boundary as a personal insult that required swift public punishment. Rather than engaging in a dramatic screaming match or pleading for my position, I maintained absolute emotional composure and let the corporate machinery document its own catastrophic mistake. I sent a single, pristine record email stating that I was no longer authorized to represent the company, attaching the exact clean draft approved by the Sterling family. I knew David Hayes carried an arrogant, revised contract that would feel like a slap in the face to our Italian partners, but I deliberately stepped back and allowed executive arrogance to face its own consequences. Predictably, the high-stakes weekend meeting in Tuscany transformed from a celebration into a frozen, hostile interrogation the moment David opened his leather binder. Lord Edward Sterling immediately noticed my absence and questioned why the lead negotiator who earned their trust had been abruptly swapped out at the finish line. When David offered a generic corporate script about streamlined authority and centralized New York oversight, Lord Sterling quietly closed the contract and placed the entire multi-million-dollar transaction on indefinite hold. By Monday morning, panic ripped through our Manhattan headquarters as a formal legal notice arrived from the Sterling family, citing a total breakdown in executive governance and broken faith. Our legal department immediately launched an emergency internal audit, demanding every email thread, draft revision, and messaging log associated with my sudden termination. As attorneys peeled back the layers, Samantha's informal text messages and meddling emails exposed her personal vendetta, proving that a major international deal had been endangered purely to soothe an executive spouse's fragile ego. With millions of dollars in projected revenue evaporating and corporate liability mounting, the executive board realized that no amount of polished rhetoric could replace the authentic trust I had built. Company lawyers contacted me directly, not to reprimand me or demand cooperation, but to ask what could still be salvaged from the burning wreckage. I maintained firm boundaries, refusing to return as a quiet patch for their mess unless my executive authority was restored in writing and Samantha was permanently stripped of operational influence. Facing total financial embarrassment and severe governance liability, the board capitulated to every single condition, writing strict boundary policies to ensure non-employees could never interfere in corporate operations again. Samantha was publicly humiliated and stripped of all corporate access, while executive leadership was forced to acknowledge that her personal vanity had nearly destroyed the entire enterprise. I returned to lead the final negotiations on my own terms, securing the sterling contract under a reinforced corporate structure that permanently recognized my true value. What Vance Enterprises meant as a cruel lesson in compliance ultimately became an expensive masterclass in real accountability and invisible labor. They thought they were simply removing a difficult employee from a boardroom, never realizing that my presence was the only structural support keeping their illusion of control intact. True professional competence does not need to shout or fight for visible recognition, because when it is carelessly removed, the surrounding structure eventually collapses under the weight of its own unearned pride.